Okay, I'm going to try and make a playable map in one afternoon.
Okay,
I will
I'm
walk you
going to
through
try
all
and
the
make
steps
a
as we go,
playable
and
map
let's see how
in
this
one
turns
afternoon.
out. So to start a map, I'm going to assume you already have editor installed. Have to make sure that the properties read -mod MWLL. I recommend using the 64-bit version. There are some issues with it, but 32-bit takes a lot longer to load, at least for me. Okay, so new map. Height map resolution, usually you want to do 2048 at the minimum. 4096 is probably good. I either use 1 or 2 meters per unit. So that'd be 8192 meters squared. That's what most maps are. I've tried doing larger, but it kind of causes the editor to crash. Smaller, you're not going to have nearly enough room to play, and you need to build yourself a background room too. So you have your play area, and then you don't want to see the edge of the world. It's going to generate a blank screen, so you do generate surface texture. 2048 should be fine for most maps. 4096 is going to take a lot longer to generate, and it doesn't need that much detail. You're going to put the textures in, and you're not going to notice too much of a difference. This should match. You can regenerate at any time, but it should match if you do import a texture to the map. Higher quality, calculate sky accessibility, we can do that later, but that'll be the finishing touch of the map. Okay, now you see everything's underwater. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just to make sure it's all cleared up, save and reload the map. You'll get these error reports. Most of them you can ignore, they're just warnings. Don't really have to look into it too much, but it'll tell you if something is completely broken. Okay, so now we're left with a blank map and just water. So we go to edit terrain, first thing we'll do. You can import height maps. For now, let's set the max height. I think the default is 256. So the default that you can paint to is 1024. If you want anything higher than that, you're going to have to reload it and normalize it. So 1024. And for our map, we're going to remove the water, but you can set the level height. Any of this stuff you can also find on the roll-up bar. And here we go. So this is what we're going to start with, default textures. Just real quick, I'm going to go over the roll-up bar and everything in it. Your AI entities, you're not really going to worry about those, mainly just the forbidden area, because that's what tells the map that you're out of bounds and to kill you. Area shapes, generally what you use, viz areas is what you use for indoors and outdoors and portals. Fog volumes you can use, though they kind of look funky, and water volumes you can use for lakes. Geometric entities are basically simple objects. They're not fixed necessarily to the map, so you can move them through track view or through the flow graph, but they can break. So you can have desyncs and people going through them. Generally you want to avoid them unless it doesn't exist in a brush form. Prefabs we can load up from the database, so tools, open view pane. Oops, sorry. database view, you go prefabs library, and you can load from here. I have my own that I've created, but generally you'll use any of these. So if we do MWLL assets, you see there's the hangar bays, single hangars, TC stuff, everything you need to make a working map is in there. So now it appears here, and you can drag them in. Sound spots is what it sounds like. Usually you'll use an actual sound spot tied to an area shape or an ambient volume tied to an area shape. Sometimes you'll use a reverb volume. That's what makes it sound like you're inside or outside. Archetype entities, I'd have to load those through the database view, but that's where your turrets are. Otherwise, if you use a turret in the entities folder, it's not going to respawn properly. Brushes, this is what I was talking about before. These are the most stable objects. They get exported right into the map and they're not going to move at all. So 90% of the time you're going to use these. Entities, you have stuff like voids, that's your birds, bugs, all the chickens. Wildlife is in there. Nothing in items really. If you use multiplayer, you have capture points, the SA stuff, spawn groups, and factories are what you're going to be using most of. Oh, and buy zone. And anything else, if you want to test stuff, will be in here. Vehicles. So you can spawn into the map and fly around or whatever. I'll touch on anything else later. Lights and other stuff. Miscellaneous, you have clouds, rivers, roads. Those are very important. We're actually going to use roads to do some of the height map stuff. And then solids, you can create a box that, and then apply a texture to. So it's a very primitive CAD type modeling. Environment, this is where we'll be modifying everything. Vegetation. Environment is everything else that's not in another tab. It's a miscellaneous stuff. So view distance, low spec view distance, which is very important if you don't have or if your players don't have great, amazing computers. Ocean fog parameters, wind, sun, moon position. I don't think it's in here yet. And the moon texture. Layer painters, that's what you're going to use to paint the actual terrain textures. And then vegetation is what it sounds like. Modifying terrain, creating holes. If you have a tunnel or something going through the terrain, you need to remove a portion of it so you can actually go through it. And then lastly, minimap, just to generate the minimap. Another important category is here you can select things to render or hide. Pretty important if you have a lot of stuff on your map, and your layers. Definitely use the layers, save them. This is what's going to, if your map gets corrupted, this will be what helps you recover it. If you save your layers, you can re-import them, or if you need to regenerate the map, you can export and import layers. Usually keep them by category of location or type, like clan base, inner sphere base, and so on. Okay, so modifying the terrain. Basic tools: flatten, smooth, riser, lower. Inner and outer radius, just how much it's going to go up or down. Example of no outer radius, it's going to be much sharper. You can enable noise. This will help you get a somewhat more, well, if you scale it way down, a little bit more of a variation between highs and lows. It's not smooth here, so that's the noise. Generally, I try to get stuff blocked out in, draw it out in paper, have an idea of where your players are going to go to and from, and players will generally take the shortest route. So I had created a height map in GeoControl. It didn't quite work importing. I used too big of a map, and I didn't have time to regenerate it. But the play area here was going to be about this section. You just have a lot of canyons. This is actually a map suggestion someone made to make Beggar's Canyon just for aerospace and then some ground stuff. So I'm going to try and do that today. So my plan was to have maybe one base here, one base up here, and then you have these moving canyons that you can kind of cross over or go between. Didn't plan it out on paper, didn't space it out, so don't know how it would actually play in real gameplay, but we'll see. So to try and remake that here, I'm going to cheat when I make the ground. I'm going to use roads. Cool thing about roads is you can align the height map to it, so you can, it's how I made the hedgerows in Harvest, instead of just using one of these tools just to try and drag along a ridge. I created a road and then smoothed it out. So first I think we need to go with a higher terrain height, go as big as possible. Might be able to raise it all together here. Yeah, so you can normalize it and you can create these huge peaks, and that'll just go to your max height level. So to try and get around this, I'm going to set the max height to pretty low. That'll normalize it because I want to start with the height map already maxed out. And it'll take a while to fill it all in by hand. I just need to get a little bit started, and then we can do the rest later. Oh, movement controls. Hold down right click to pan the camera, middle click to move up, down, left, right, and then middle and right click to zoom in and out. You can also scroll for fine control. This number down here, speed, will adjust how much you do it. So it's going to be a lot more sensitive if I do it 10 speed versus I prefer 2. You can also modify it on this screen. Help you see it better. Generally, I don't like doing this for fine tuning. Set max height and normalize. So now we have a huge plateau. So since we're going to cut canyons into it, this is where we'll start. This stuff we'll take care of later. Shouldn't matter too much. So go to your objects in the roll-up bar, miscellaneous, road. We're going to want to align to follow the terrain usually, but I think in this case it'd be best if we do XY lock. No, sorry, follow terrain. That way the Z is here, 1024. So we'll start with well, as wide as we can go. I think it's 100. Yep. Step size, it's going to be as big as possible. It may take a little bit to render because of the distances we're going to do. View distance, view forever. Tile length doesn't matter now. And sort priorities, if you have multiple roads, you can overlap them. You're able to modify every point that you click. So if you watch here, okay, you have to get a little closer for it to register on the ground. So you can see that it kind of drags across. Now if I click here, it starts to create a spline curve. And get closer. We'll smooth out everything later as well. Double click to end creating the road. So we'll start with this. I don't want to render too much. Go to move object and we can set the ground, the level to the ground. I'm going to do maybe 50. Still going to render over top of the terrain and just click align height map and hope it works. Very good. We cut into the terrain. Now we use this as a starting point. Obviously it's too narrow to actually do anything, and we're going to lower the upper height later. I think we can delete this one. If you have too many of those huge roads to make terrain, your frame rate's gonna drop significantly. Don't know what happened to that point there. I think it went off into space somewhere. Yep. Okay, so let's modify this. Click to select. I'm just going to find that point. There it is. To edit, double click on the point to remove it. There you go. So like I was saying before, you can click to drag each point. You can change the angle, rotation of the road if you want to do a slight ramp or something. And you can change the width too. I think it goes 100, more than that, 100. I wonder if I can. Yeah, okay. So you can make it wider too. But it takes a lot longer to render. So we're just going to go ahead and make that 100 for now. And then we can move the points around a little better. When you're done editing, just click edit again and it'll stop. Get out of that mode. Set the height to, what I do, 100, I think. Align height map. Another downside of a wider road is it takes a lot longer for it to align it. If we're lucky, it hasn't crashed. Okay, there we go. Delete it before we do anything else. Otherwise, we'll never get anywhere. Okay, starting to get somewhere. Let's do one, maybe two more of these, and then we'll see what else we need to add. Okay, it's stuck to the 100-meter ground. Follow terrain. It's stuck to the edge again. So hit escape to cancel. The closer you get to the edge of your map, the less exaggerated the terrain features are, the more realistic it'll look. It'll start to appear like things are fading into the distance. Set height to 100 on the line. Okay, we have the start of a canyon. I'm going to add a couple branches of the river to make the terrain a little bit more balanced. Like I said, I didn't plan this one out as well as I should have. So we'll see how it turns out. Worst case is I'll just regenerate it on GeoControl later and import it. Actually, I think now that we have the basics of it, yes, you can use the same technique to cut rivers. Rivers can, well, generally with rivers, contrary to what you have in real life, can flow in any direction. So you don't need to have it flowing downhill. It's easier just to make it flat and then say whatever. You can flow slightly uphill if you want, but once you start rotating them and moving them around, it starts to get really weird. And things are very, very difficult to line up. It's possible, but you have to kind of play with the angles a lot and use particles to hide the seams. So we're going to open the terrain editor here. I'm going to touch up some of the areas like this. And then we're going to lower the terrain around where we created the river, the valley. And then after that, we'll add some noise to the hills and the canyon so it doesn't look quite so, it's like a deep gorge. And then just for simplicity's sake, I'll run it through some filters in GeoControl. Oh, should have been doing this. flatten. Okay, I'm going to set the height to 100 and just go over where we created the river. Unfortunately, you can't undo if you do it this way, which is why I started with the road, because that was much easier to manipulate. So now, any mistakes I made, I have to touch up by hand. Okay, so if we have, let's say, a start base down here and one up here, we want there to be multiple avenues to get across the map and ways to get around, and we have to add bases in key areas to force people to go to them. In TSA maps, most of them are pretty linear, and you just have everyone slugging it out in one line. Which apparently some people like, I don't know why. So to get around that, you have to have strategically placed capture points in factories to force people to fight in new areas. If you have something really neat in one corner of your map, no one's going to go there because no one knows it's there except you. You have to put, I don't know, a capture point or a factory to force people to look at it, to go through that, to utilize that part of the terrain. Some people will go around, but most of the population will not. See, so people could go through here. I might do a cut through or tunnel in the center here. Definitely one here. Let's smooth this out, make it a bigger bend, get it closer together. And then these, same with this section. And there should also be a pass through here. So we have someone going this way, here, maybe one here too. Yeah, that was my initial plan with this, which didn't work too well. Let's see if I have. Here it is. So that was the initial plan, and I'd have to cut out a significant portion of it just to utilize that center area, because it was made for a 16 kilometer, no, yeah, 16 kilometer square map instead of 8 kilometer. But unfortunately, when I tried it last night, it just kind of hung up if I tried to jump in the game or place in any objects. It was just way too big for it to handle for whatever reason. So this is what I'm going to try and recreate, and if this doesn't, if this doesn't pan out, I'll just go through, create a new height map in GeoControl that's pretty similar to this and replace the objects that we placed today. Lastly, I think we need something in this area and maybe over here. So possibly pass through this way. So I'm going to do smaller mountains here. Nope, and I can't undo, so I have to go over this section again. Trying to think what I should put here. Maybe I'll just make it a more gradual kind of canyon. And then I'm going to do some background. So most of the map will be here, these squares, and then I'm going to add a little bit of a, maybe slightly smaller, kind of like a tributary river here. And another one here. Just to break up the terrain. So if you go above the max terrain height, if you're flying, you don't just see something square looking. And then also in the other map I had a couple similar areas. Enable some noise here, so it's not completely smooth. And then lastly, we're going to touch up these holes that we have in the map still. Hardness to 1, so it just snaps to the height. Disable noise. You only really have to click on it once. You don't have to hold it down to get the right height. we go. That's pretty much mapped, so let's see what it looks like here. Pretty weird, right? Well, now we have to smooth it. I'm going to save it. Definitely save often, especially if you're painting the terrain. It just loads everything to memory, then will crash. Just a matter of when. That's what I assume anyways. I'm not sure. It just crashes often. So smoothing, usually a lower hardness is better, but we're dealing with some pretty big heights. All right. So we got to do much higher hardness. So I've set it to 0.75. Go a lot higher with that. Just want to smooth the edges real quick. So when I parse it through GeoControl and I apply the filters to it, it doesn't act so extreme. Oh, nice. I'm glad I saved it because it just crashed. Smooth, hardness to 1, 200-meter radius. Yeah, it crashes often. Save often, and it saves its own back files, which you just named to cry. But even those I would make a backup of because they can get corrupted, and then you may not notice how bad it is until it's too late. And by corrupted, it's going to still, you'll be able to open it, but something's just going to be weird about the entire thing. So you'll have to export the height map, export the texture, export all your time of day, settings, and layers, and then import that into a new map. Which can be done, well, it doesn't take too long. It's less painful than making a whole new map. Looks a little bit better. Still miss some areas. Missed a lot more than I thought. Okay, I'm gonna cheat again. Instead of smoothing out everything, because the next steps would be to really start lowering terrain everywhere. Around here, smoothing out the edges, and then just so all you have left is just a couple peaks, then a smooth transition into the mountains, kind of like this. I'm going to load it all into GeoControl. Okay, so probably the best way is 16-bit raw. GeoControl's since been replaced by, I think it's World Builder. You can use Crera, I think. A couple other programs out there. Newer versions of the CryEngine have these filters built in. So, terrain import, 16-bit here. Very basic. Definitely need some smoothing. Mountains. Canyons. We'll see how that works. So, you need to do a lot more. No, I have it through Living Legends. It's paid, but I do know that there are other programs out there. Okay, that's interesting. That's not quite right. Yeah, it just wiped out all the height. So I'm just going to try it one more time. If it doesn't work, we'll just go with it. Yeah. It's fun like that. Doesn't always work. So failing that, we'll just have to come back and do it here, maybe later. One more thing I can try. Oh. Okay, just for the sake of making something, even if it's a lot smaller, I've loaded that, not that one, this height map, the entire thing. So now we have something we can work with. Okay, layers. So we go open view pane. Where is it? Terrain texture layers. So each of these has a min and max height that you can paint to and min and max angle that you can paint to. Scale for the actual texture on it and the projection direction. So I'm going to need, since it's a sandy map, we don't need too many. Should be pretty simple. So I'll do a grass one, a sand one, some rocks, lower cliffs, mid and upper cliffs. We'll just do some different colors on them, I think. And then maybe one or two others for anything I forgot. I want to take a look at what the minimum height is that we'll be painting to. And we'll have to smooth it out later too. All right. So each of these has a texture layer and an actual, well, material. The material is the close-up, how it looks, and the texture layer is how it looks from kind of a distance. So let's rename these. So grass, that's fine. Texture layer. Let's look for something. Plains, grass. There. Dirt. You can preview them here in the diffuse and bump map and it's found here at materials and then terrain. So we'll do ground, where is it? Lumpy stones maybe. Maybe a little grassy. And then if you apply that, you have to hit assign material. It's kind of weird. Change texture layer. So how do we want it to look on the ground from a distance? You really have to play with it once you start seeing it to see how it looks and see what works. That looks good. For cliffs, generally you want to use one of these 3D ones. So it has a texture set to the X, Y, and Z, just because it's not flat. Everything else is usually just on the Z projection. But you can still preview it by opening it up. Okay, that looks good. And for now, I'm going to assign these to the same material. And we'll do different colors later. Is that what it is? Yeah, okay. Do some fine rocks at the top, and then maybe we'll do that here instead. Change this to I don't know, one of these. See if that looks good. Okay, now we can start setting the min and max heights. So for this upper ground, I want it to be, I don't know, maybe, let's see actually, what's our maximum height? So up here, and watch this Z down here, 500, 500, 600, 500, okay. I don't know if you can use custom files. I've never tried that. You probably can, although some of them in here, let's see if some of these don't work, and I don't know why. I'm not sure which ones they are, to be honest, or I'd show you. And so just clicking, but they just say it's not, you have to use like a lossless format or something, even though that's in this file and it's supposed to be the same. All right, so we're going to do 400 and up. So upper ones, then you do want some kind of overlap between the angles and the heights of these. So if I do 300 to, I don't know, 360, 250 to 310, this will help you get less of a sheer line between the layers. And 0 to 260. Rocks will do 0 to, well, we want a lesser angle, so we'll do 0 to 410. For all of these. This will be at, I don't know, maybe up to 10 degrees, 7 to 15, and 10 to, I don't know, 30. 28 to 90 for all of these. And then here we'll do what we did down here, except this one will be 0 to 30 and no, sorry, 0 to 15 and 10 to 30. So the end result is you can kind of just brush over the entire map to get a basic texture. If we go to Layer Painter, we should see everything here. So brush radius and hardness remain the same type as before when we were working with modifying the terrain height, but you can do much larger radius. Filter, you can mask it here. Generally we're going to paint by layer ID, and that's going to paint to whatever we selected for the heights and angles here. Let's save it now. Filter, you can kind of increase or decrease the brightness. One centers it, to layer saves it to that layer. So if I want to change the color of some of these cliff pieces, I want to make it, I don't know, yellowish, kind of, maybe a little brighter so it shows up. I click to layer, and then the next time I go to it, it's saved. Do some variation in the colors. Oops. Oh, then click to layer. You don't need too much of a color on some of these. Most of them are usually what they are in the textures. See what happens. So you can see that the altitude and slope degrees is saved. So there we go. Now every time I click, it's going to start regenerating the texture block. So you see these squares here. That was for me trying to import texture, I think. But it starts to apply the grass to areas that it should be grassy. You may have to click twice, a couple times to get the color to stick. Alright, then we'll go over with dirt. See how it flashes white now? It's gotta save everything. So, let's do that. And just to be safe, I'll save it. When you generate the surface texture, it creates the terrain texture.pack. And that's what it loads off of. So I think that if you don't generate it, it creates too big of a file just in its memory, and I think that's why it crashes. So I'm just going to reload it to kind of refresh it now that I've generated it. There, nothing's turning white anymore. Why don't I just focus on this area just so you can see what the terrain will look like with all the layers put together. Alright, so that's pretty dark for a cliff, and I don't know if I like that texture. Might need to make it bigger. So let's open the terrain texture layers. What's that, cliff 1? So detail scale, I think let's try 0.25. Much rockier. But in general, I don't think that's... maybe it just needs to be bigger. Okay, that's the right size, but poor quality, so gotta find a different texture. Maybe one of these island ones. Assign material and reset this. Off screen, I'm just kind of selecting them and then trying them by clicking assign material just to see the differences quickly. That's softer. Let's try this. Cliff limestone. Where'd it go? Great, I think I lost that. Okay, there it is. .5. It's not too bad, but it needs to be lighter. Too yellow. Okay, start with that. Click 2. Oh. Forgot to assign it to other ones. So we can just reopen it. Oh, I see. It's somehow, there we go. Got stacked together. So clicking on this opens it up here rather than just selecting it. So I can click, open it, select, and assign material quickly. Set these all to 0.5. And that should do it. There. Don't like that color at all. Really have to play around with it a lot to get it to look right. But at least it's starting to look like something. Now some of the textures, draw distance is different, so you don't know why that is. So you may have to just select different ones. I think it may be more detailed or something, I'm not positive. See how it kind of appears as I get closer. So for now, and depending on how detailed your map is, I don't necessarily recommend this. We go to environment and terrain, detail layers, viewer's distance. Changes that. So now you can see everything. This blending, this patchiness, is because it's too different of a color. Also because we just used the paint to layer, so it explicitly cut off at whatever degrees and height we set. To get around that, you should set it to a lighter one, or have a transition texture in between the two. Like if you're going from, I don't know, sand to complete concrete, you may want to put like a little bit of dirt between it just to kind of break up the edge a little bit. So in our case, I'm just going to make it a lot lighter. Still kind of looks a little funky, but it'll work for now. Same thing with these. we still have something weird going on here. We disable paint layer ID, bring the height or the radius way down. Disable mask too, I think. Okay, sorry, disable mask by layer. You can just kind of paint over top of it, bring the hardness down, and get some little smoother edges. Alright, whatever. So it's kind of coming along. I'm just going to move to the next step, just because this doesn't matter. Save and generate surface texture. Okay, things kind of piece themselves together a little better once you generate it too. I'm going to reload to clear it. And I'm just going to paint this area. Oh, that's the problem. Alright, it should be okay because I didn't modify too much. Alright, let's go over some of the object placement. In a sec. First, I'm going to do something with the time of day. It's kind of dark in the sky, so time of day is kind of difficult. There's a lot of options here, and the best way to do it is to play around with a lot of them. Everything right now is just flat to the same level, so except for the color. Where is it? Okay, so instead of messing around with all this, I always load something I've either created before or base it off of an existing time of day. So can't do anything just yet, but we need to export something from another file. So we're going to go to some of the Crisis Wars stuff. Never mind. I'll post something somewhere. Some of the time of days. I've got to find them first. Okay, can you hear me now? All right, I don't know again how much, where it cut off. Can you tell me? You know where it cut off? Or at least what I was talking about when it cut off. Jeez, okay, so great, 10 minutes. Um, time of day. All right, so import TOD files, you can modify them a lot easier once you have something structured. So the sun's color, you don't want the sun shining through the ground yellow, so you change it to the night sky color. Stuff like that, and that's how you really learn it. You have to play around with a lot of these settings just to understand exactly what they do. Most of these graphs are, the scale is set way too high. Example of the fog, which I was trying to show, is if this is way too high, anywhere more than 1, you're not going to see a thing. And it goes all the way to 100. So you can increase the control height if you want, but that increases everything else, makes it a pain in the ass. So to get around that, we click record, and that's going to change it at the current time of day. So if I type 1 here, it creates a point. Can't see anything because there's too much fog, but, or 10, increases it. But that's how you can fine tune it to something like that. Double click on the point to remove it. Otherwise, double click to place it and move it around. You have stuff like horizon colors, just mimic the way the sun and the sky work in real life. Star intensity, you don't want the stars shining in day usually. Moon, corona, everything. This is really if you have a dynamic time of day, otherwise you'll set it to 1 point. Play speed is going to be pretty low. I will post a file later that calculates how long each time of day will be based on the number here. Start time and end time is for the time of day cycle, not necessarily that day. So if you have a start time of 6 a.m., end time midnight, as soon as it hits, the next day, it's going to jump right to 6 a.m. It won't go through the night. So to get around that, we set the start time in the flow graph instead of on here, which I will show later. And then playing, pausing, whatever. I recommend exporting this when you're done or close to being done. It can get corrupted, but it's a text file, so you can just copy and paste it into a new file and then it'll load properly. So I've imported, this is from I think it's a power struggle map from Crisis Wars. May not be included within the standard installation of Living Legends, but I can post the file. That way you have something to work with. I can also rip out a few other files if we need some more. So, trying to figure out what happened to the skybox. Okay, so low spec and standard skybox. Benefit of skybox is you have this background terrain. You can make your own, but it's a square box. You can kind of see a corner here, I think. So you have to do some kind of thing with warping. I haven't figured it out, but I haven't really bothered either. So benefit is you have extra background terrain. The downside is you can't see the sun anymore. Everything's lighting up from the direction of the sun, but it's just not there. Sky is the blank one, so you press this arrow to load it up. Now you can see the sky, the sun. So benefits and downsides to each. If you have a cloudy map, definitely just use one of those instead of worrying about the dynamic time of day. You can still have the dynamic as we do on bogs and marshes. You just do one of these. And it's cloudy. You don't have to make a million clouds. Generally for lower view spec, you want some kind of background. Makes rendering a lot easier, and you can still see the background even if the view distance is tiny. So if I set this to 500 and it's low, well, yeah. You get the idea. For higher ones, you can do it skybox if you have something really cool or you want to put up there. I think there's a wait, went away. I think somewhere in here there may be the skybox that's used for extremity. Obviously Palisades. This one is should be right. Frostbite. So I'm just going to leave it as sky. That's the blank skybox. Okay. Next, everything's really green, so I'd adjust the color. This sky and terrain brightening color will change that significantly, so you can get some really weird looking landscapes out of that. Object placement. Alright, I'm going to load one of my prefabs in here. Going to database view, prefabs library, open. This is something I've done. So I have a few things that I've taken from other maps just to make it easier. Prefabs you can open, update, anything changes you do if you do open and close it. Like if I open it and move this around and then close it, I can update the entire prefab. So if I select it, I just click this right here. Otherwise, just extract all. The bases, Living Legends bases, generally you'd want to keep them closed up unless you're modifying them. Just because it makes it easier to move things around, and there's a lot of objects in them. Clouds, I think cloud volume or distance cloud. Then you have to apply a material. Not sure where it is. Anyways. Here, let's try this. And the material editor, M opens it up. You can reset it, get material from it, or assign to it. I don't think this is the right cloud volume. Type of entity. It's been a while since I've done this. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so it's under entities. Assign material to it. And then the XML cloud file. All these have a different kind of volume, and then you can rescale it as you wish. One thing about larger clouds is they will clip the terrain if you're far away. Don't know if I'll be able to get it, but see if I make it 50. Even if you're, okay, too big. And it's really, okay, see how it's starting to clip through the terrain right up here? Not really sure how to get around that. I think it's just a problem with the engine. But by scaling clouds and overlapping them, doing a couple of these, you can make bigger clouds without having to make some kind of XML for it. So if I do couple different overlaps, maybe this one bigger. Starts to look like some kind of real cloud. And then the other files with, or parameters with that is you can have them move. Select them all. Tell them to auto move. This little loop bounding box, so if you have a direction and a vector, minus 2.500, bounding box 7,000, 4,000, 4,000, and a fade distance of, that's pretty high. So when it starts to fade and then reappear. Should be able to see it start to move now. Yep. Okay, where do we want to put our base? Over here, I guess. Okay, so prefabs, we have Living Legends, assets, mech hangers, I think are the big ones. Set to ground, yeah, it's really big. So this map isn't well suited to that, so we're going to stick it up here. So these mech bays use a lot of solids. That's why sometimes you can desync and fall through it, because it's using geometric entities instead of brushes in addition to solids. So this solid with the stripes means it won't render in game. If you see this green line around the door, that's a portal into the viz area. So if I go in here, everything's darker, but then everything's like kind of blinding bright outside. That's how you get two different, kind of like you're going from inside to outside. Well, it's exactly that. And your eyes are adjusting. This is also how you prevent rain from going inside buildings and other particle effects that are outside. So just to mess with this a little bit, I'm going to extract all. I'm going to save it because I have been having problems with it crashing when I go into game. And let's go into the hangar. So Control G to get into game. Ah, there we go. Let's try again. Should work. Okay, looks like I won't be doing that this time. Usually means I have to restart my computer. And this is a new install of Windows, so I don't know. I'm guessing it's some kind of compatibility issue. I'm not going to worry about it now. Anyways, let's load it up. Alright, so if let's start disabling some stuff. Here. So see how I can't see anything despite disabling the background? That's the viz area. So there's a portal near the front, and that allows you, when the screen is over top of it, to start rendering the background. And here it's kind of broken off with the terrain. It's loading in kind of chunks or whatever. And that's what this portal does. So the viz area, I think, here. And there's a couple viz areas here connected together with portals. So it's a square object that goes over top of the edge of the viz area. I'm going to pull this one and this one out. Okay, so obviously you want those where your doors are going to be. So as you enter it, it stops rendering everything else. It just kind of freezes the rendering. You can also, in some maps, if it allows for it, you can increase performance a lot by cleverly utilizing these viz areas. So in order for it to be set up, these are both under area, I think. Yeah, viz area and portal. So let's create one. We're going to lock it to the XY plane, but we want it pretty high, so it should work. Just keep an eye on the Z-axis when you start placing objects. You also, when you're placing objects, you have a snap to grid. You can change that, and snap to angle if you're rotating something. So I'm going to make a box. Made too many. Double click to exit. So edit shape, double click to remove, edit shape to close it. So that's just like this viz area. We can do display filled, change the height, and that's how you create it. Same thing with the portal. All area shapes are created the same way, though they have different functions. The portal is actually a very thin area shape, and it has to encompass the entire plane here. So it has to just go just over top. But maybe if I display filled, you can see it kind of intersecting right here. That's the only way it's going to work. If you have it over the edge or something, it's going to mess up and things are going to look weird. If you have it over top of the entire, like bigger than the viz area, it's not going to work properly. They're a pain to set up, so definitely use these snap to grids. And I recommend setting them up outside of the area that you need to put it in, just so everything's level and square, and then moving it in and adjusting it. Another thing with viz areas is they will, if they intersect an object, the object may or may not render, depending on where, I guess it's based on the centroid of the object is. So this hanger does it by having a shell and then an interior. The shell is outside of all the viz areas. This is an I think it's an occluder, yeah, just to prevent view. And then everything inside the viz areas gets rendered differently. I pulled it out so you can't see it. Let's So that's what keeps everything darker inside. If I can select this viz area again, I have to do this. There we go. See how the color of everything changes depending on where it is? That's a property of the actual viz area. So it's this ambient color. So how does it look from inside? Does it look dark in there? Is it really bright outside? Or is it a softer entrance? Is there a lot of light inside, or is it dark outside? If you look into your own house from outside at night, are the lights on inside? Then you're going to be able to see everything. If the lights are off, then it's going to behave differently. This is what that mimics. The other thing that I'm going to touch very briefly on is spawn points, spawn groups, and factories. I'm not going to be able to select them here because they're just kind of a placeholder object that doesn't render in game. So I'm going to go to select objects. Where is it? Here. Factory. If you're creating a factory, I think you should 99% of the time just use one of these prefabs. If you're modifying it or creating something new, you're going to have to know what you're doing or play around with it a lot. And it's a little difficult to explain, and it's tedious, so most of the time you're not going to be doing it, so I'm not going to touch on it here. I can explain in person if you need me to. The factory and spawn group is what you click on in game to spawn. Well, the spawn group is. That's what places on the mini-map. The factory places that little mech symbol based on what type it is. So you want those at the same XY coordinates as each other, otherwise you're going to have icons floating in the map for no reason. The factory here, let's see, has a lot of parameters, and this I do recommend that you use if you have to, because this selects the buy options. So if you're putting one of these bases in the middle of the map, maybe you don't want assault mechs there. And this is how you can change it. Pretty self-explanatory. And then these slot IDs is how it references the build zones. So this area ID is referenced to the specific, let's see, area. See these, there, IS vehicle trigger 63, factory 9. That's going to have a vehicle area ID and an area ID. I believe the area ID is just, it's been a while. Vehicle area ID is definitely the area. Don't remember what the actual, this one is. I'd have to play around with a fight to find out. And then use spawn helper entity. This factory doesn't do it, but any other one you're going to need to place a blank object to reference as the spawn point. It'll put it in the area, but it needs to know where, and it needs a helper. This uses a actual object as the factory. So it's got like a little dot in each of these. If I move this out, you'll be able to see. And then it's got the doors. So that's how it knows where to place the objects. Anything else, I really wouldn't recommend getting into these unless you really want to mess around with it. Just check, stick to the buy zones. And the team name, tan or black. Tan is Innersphere, black is clan. That's just from the regular Crisis team names, I guess. I think the SZ name, I believe that changes the icon type. I just leave it the same. Power and stuff, we're not worrying about queue size. So it's going to assign, every time someone clicks a buy, it's going to assign that buy to one of these bays. Since there's 8 bays and 5 queue size, that means a total of 13 people can buy at the same time and have it queue it up. Anything more, it just won't recognize the input of. So because people are always in menus and selecting stuff at different times, you almost never have to worry about that. This is one of the reasons you use smaller factories out in the middle of the map instead of these large ones. One, because they take up a lot of space, and two is you don't need all those extra buy zones and factory areas or spawn points. You can toggle disable repairs. Main base factories always have repairs enabled. Okay, spawn groups. Oh, looks like they created something over there too. Okay. So just as an example, each of these spawn points, which is found underneath entity, is connected to a spawn group. The group tells it to basically randomize wherever that person spawns. Team name, if you set it blank, you have to link it to a capture zone, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Enabled or disabled, and that's it. And then you have to click here, pick target, and the best way to do that is let's see, 517, if I delete this link, alright, so I'm going to link it to 517 by clicking pick target, double clicking the entity here, and then renaming the link. And that's how it knows to link to it, function properly. That's just about it for these types of objects, though there is one more thing. Occluder areas work kind of like a viz area, except they're two-dimensional. They don't function as well just because of if they don't take up a lot of area, and you have to be close to it for it to work. But if you put occluders in, let's say, these giant mountains everywhere, you will increase performance. And remember to make them really tall, excessively tall, and just stick them deep into the ground, because otherwise the engine will start to render stuff despite there being an occluder there. Like if I do this, you can still see straight through it. Lights, another thing you can place through entity. Distance ratio, how far away it can be seen, radius, and the color. And then you have diffuse multiplier and HDR dynamic. Generally they'll be simple lights, and you just need to have them as 0. Looks like this stuff didn't delete the last time I deleted stuff. Okay. Alright, let's take a look at the... No, where is it? There's a bunch of stuff in here. I'm looking for not the VTOLs, the aerospace fighter stuff. Okay, neutral mech bays are kept in here. BA bunkers all set up, ready to go. Different classes of mech bays without spawns, if you want to put the spawn in a battle armor bunker somewhere else. 6 spawn. Here it is. So TOA critical. You have aerospace, HQ, and just VTOL. So I think we want to use these ones. Yep. So it's a prefab of 2 prefabs. It's the one for the aerospace and the one for the VTOLs. This uses a lot of solids too, which you only really have to worry about the number of solids is if you have tons of them. They won't render at all, and they'll just fall right through them all. Similar situation here, where the buy zone's extended a little bit more. The factories are here, and then VTOL factories on the platforms, obviously, spawn group in the central area here. For a capture point, you'll create an area shape. Yeah, area shape. Height. And you have to link it to a capture point. It's pretty simple. Under multiplayer, capture point here. And then you have to tell the shape to pick this as a target. So that will trigger this capture point. And the capture point parameters, you have clan, inner sphere, weight, outpost. It can be, and that's what Betty's going to say when you capture the outpost, factory, base, and strategic area, I think is the last one. Starting team, you can have teams start with something if you want to make a map more complex. And then here is where you link to spawn groups or factories. So if I click capture point, scroll down to pick target, spawn group. So now I've told the capture point to trigger the spawn group. So I'm going to disable this team name, and then I just have to rename this to capture. Same thing with linking it to turrets and factories and buy zones. So a buy zone is another entity that's linked to an area. I think there's one in the repair bay. Okay, it's linked to this object here. See that yellow thing? I think that's attached to this actual physical object. You can also have it as a factory, or let's see. Yeah, it's linked to that repair bay. So buy zone, I think it's just a little dollar sign. Yep. So you link that to an area, and you have it turn it into a buy area too. Or sorry, I don't remember offhand. Yeah, I think you just click it to here. Yep. So that means inside of here, you can buy anything here. Generally just weapons and ammo, because it needs a factory to spawn anything else. I don't think buy zones will show up on the mini map, and I think that's the difference, the benefit of having it. Turrets can be found under archetyped entity, but you have to import that from the database. Entity library. Don't remember which one of these. I think that's it. Yep. Let's see. Hawkeye and Eagle Eye are the two AA turrets. definitely avoid putting the eagle eye anywhere except the main bases. Even then, if it's a small map, it's going to suppress a lot of airspace and really be kind of unbalanced. Sentinels are the twin medium laser turrets. Use those, well, sparingly, but at bases and capture strategic areas. You can use the large beam turrets, but the Hellgivers, but they are very deadly just because of the range that they can engage with pinpoint accuracy. The PPC and other stuff, I don't think it actually works. It was made for an old game mode that we don't have. Camera is what's found in Solaris Arena, and will target any mech near it, but doesn't do anything to it. AMS, tiny, so you gotta scale that up for base lamps. Same thing with LRM Calliope, don't think we use that at all. Standard Calliope. Still powerful, and just imagine if that was the LRM version, no one would live. These will kind of sync to whatever the nearest capture zone is, or I think actually the factory it links to, or spawn group, I'm not sure which. But to avoid things from the engine from guessing, just do another capture point link and rename. And then you don't have to worry about the engine making a mistake for you. So this means that if I'm within this blue box, that I will capture that zone. And then to mark it, we use, let's see, oh, another thing you can put for the capture is one of these holograms or flags. Okay, doesn't like that. Which will change to whichever flag, lantern, or sphere. When the area is captured, you just link it the same way. Beacon. These are the deadly tank traps. Some people complain about because they're either placed in the wide open area. You want to put the capture zone at an actual natural border so that people understand easily where it is and isn't. There's some maps where it's just a small square, some maps where it's a giant area, and it should be either marked on the mini map if it's a giant area, or a smaller area. It needs to have these placed in a spot that makes sense, and a spot that people aren't going to get tanks stuck on them. It just flashes lights here. What else am I thinking of? There's other types of flags too. Some are in here. That's pretty much it for those. Alright. Brushes and geometric entities. Like I said before, some are in different, some are only geometric entities, some are both. Use brushes if you can, if you don't need it to move. If you do mess around with track view or moving stuff within flow graphs, then you will have to use a geometric entity of that version, of that object. One thing I do want to say about this, because people do, I mean, it's a dropship, so what's not to love? It's unoptimized, and there's some serious problems with the ramp. Some vehicles will fall clean through it, some will get stuck on it, so you really should avoid using it as a actual functioning base. It's also going to really drive up your tries and display points, so try to avoid using them if you can. If you can resist it. Anything crisis related is in library, usually architecture for everything. Just type in anything to search here and you can probably find it. A lot of things exist, and there's a lot of things that aren't quite named what you would think they are, concrete structures and whatnot. In here, it makes a little bit more sense. No, sorry. Really, everything will be in architecture again. Let's see. And just place it. Object parameters, you can look at material layers too, but cast shadow maps. In order to see it, we need to change the time of day. There you go. Support second viz area. I think that's used for these objects. A little more resource intensive, but in most cases you won't need to use them. Let's see. Frozen, if it's a snow map. Wet, obviously, for rain. The other two don't really do much. Oh. So that, unless I'm missing something huge, should cover just about everything. Vehicles, you can just place. I'm going to save this, just in case it crashes it. So it's blank. Right click on it and click script. It's going to spawn the base vehicle without any variant. Reload script is also down here. We don't really worry about these respawn things because we buy everything through the mech base. Modification and paint, if you want to mess around with whatever, or even if you want to just load up the editor to test out mechs, just type it in. Just FYI, legs won't render. Actually, most components, except for the torso, won't render the paint in the editor. So it's not broken. It's just broken in the editor. You can do enable physics, drop it to the ground, toggle anything. I'm not going to switch the game and get in it because I'm just going to crash again. Okay. Vegetation. Place this similarly to the terrain textures. You can either have it auto place, or you can brush it by hand, or you can have it procedurally generated. So we're going to, it's completely blank now. Let's create an object. So these shortcuts to the left, natural. Do some bushes. Maybe some grass too. Yeah, here it is. Do some dry grass, I think, not frozen. Do one of those. can add a smaller bush too. Nah, rocks. Okay, so for each of these, there's a ton of parameters. So let's get to a blank area to test them. The smaller objects and the stuff that you're not really going to see from a distance. Actually, speaking of distance, I'm going to add a tree. So smaller objects like grass, you can have procedurally generated on terrain layers. Actually, I recommend that because it means it only has to render it when it's closer. So right now it's just putting them to a certain distance. It's got a sharp edge. You can increase it, but it'll start to load in giant squares and look kind of funny. So if you're relying on a lot of grass, you got to place it all. Like on harvest, you have to place it all. But you can do that either by brush, or you can right click here and auto distribute. Before you do that though, which one was I on? This one. Just like with the terrain colors, you can set the elevation and slope. Slope here is 0 to 255, not 0 to 90. So 255 equals 90 degrees, 125, 27, whatever, is 45 degrees, and so on. Just calculate it yourself. So I think I'm going to do 0 to, I don't know, 45, which is in 45 degrees. It's part of the 255. For grass, I don't want it to cast shadow because that's going to make it really performance intensive. I'm going to use the terrain color so it doesn't stick out too much. I'm not going to use sprites here because it starts to look funny if it stands out over a large area. I think I will use an alpha blend though, so it kind of blends into the ground. And then the most intensive, important thing is density. Larger the number, the less often it'll appear. When you're painting them with a brush, it's every time you click, or every instance that reads that your mouse was held down, it will regenerate this, as long as you are moving the mouse, or recalculate that, sorry. So right now, I'm going to auto distribute. So it has placed them everywhere within the angles that I've specified. If you want them to just stick to, it's a selectable object, so it's movable. If you want them to just stick to, let's say, this green grass, but you want them to auto distribute, you have to calculate what the angles and height would be compared to here. So didn't get nearly enough, so I'm just going to clear them all. And what's happened? Okay, took a while to load because there's tons of them. Okay. You can also paint them like this. So you see, as I hold it down, it regenerates and calculates placing them. So you can place 1,000,000 of them, even if you have this number pretty high. So I'll show you what these parameters do. Terrain color lets it kind of change as it's placed over here. Alpha blend makes it sharper. So again, grass, you don't really see much of it unless you're looking down. So you don't need to do that. Creating sprites makes it look a little funny at distance. You're really going to worry about that only with trees and stuff that you can afford to do that with. Wet and frozen, don't really need to worry about with grass. It's just another thing for your computer to render. Definitely want to do random rotation, which means I need to select them. So I hit escape to clear. Go to vegetation, delete them. Now, this number next to the vegetation is going to show how many are in the entire map. So if I do auto distribute again, okay, it's only 100,000 this time instead of 400,000. And they're actually placed. Let's do the same thing with this. So you'll start to see some different grass here. Trees, want this at least 15. Let's start higher. 20. Not going to use terrain color, but we will not align it to terrain either. If you do, well, it just makes it normal to the terrain. Going to do cast shadow though. So if I were to check it here, they disappear pretty quickly. But if let's do a different tree. Replace object. One of these maybe. Okay, so I can use sprites. All right, so if I have them placed procedurally, where is it? There it is. They kind of snap in and out. If I instead auto distribute slope, now you can see them from a distance. That's interesting. I think because I replaced the object, it's not loading it properly at a distance. All right, whatever. It's not. I must have done something wrong. Okay, so they show up in the distance, but they're going to be completely solid, so you're just going to run your mechs right into them. So you can have them like this, but I would put them in out of reach places, or yeah, generally in the background. For trees in general, you're going to use the destructible object. Clear all instances. Okay, did I do something wrong? Oh, elevation. I just want to demonstrate sprites. You can also set the max view distance and sprite distance ratio. Terrain color obviously makes them blend in more. It's right about here that the sprites start appearing. They're just two-dimensional objects. And that's the difference there. They'll render at a much greater distance with the full model. Keep an eye on the number of tries and the DP. You want to keep that under, I think, 1,000, maybe 2,000 at most. And tries, once you get up to like under 3 million, is probably best. It's really going to affect everyone differently. And then you have to start using occluders and vis areas to break up everything. So we can afford to use sprites but I'm going to increase the ratio a little bit. So you can see that there's something there, but it doesn't have to render the full object at that distance. Destructible objects are under entity, no, yeah, entities. I think it's under physics. Yep. So the default object is just this tree that will break if I shoot it. You can set up some neat stuff with this, having it explode or whatever. But generally, it'll be under the prefabs that you'll find most of the ones you want. Unfortunately, there's no way to place these procedurally throughout the map. You have to do a lot of copying and pasting. So to copy it, yeah, it's a pain. So to start copying, oh, I disabled this. Select a couple, rotate them a bit, just so you have like a random pattern, a little bit. And then you can start set to follow terrain, copy and paste groups. And once you have a group together, you can delete them over, well, rocks and places that they shouldn't grow. It's really the easiest way is just to start small and just start growing it. For all of them, I think you have, yep, LOD ratio, level detail, and view distance ratio will dictate when it starts to disappear. So you just want to have them fade out with the rest of your vegetation. Generally, and if you go into game, you'd be able to see the viewfinder. If it's over 1,500 meters, you probably don't need it to render, unless you're zoomed in all the way and need to hide mechs. So keep that in mind when you're creating it. The other objects should be under prefabs, but we have to load it up. There. So outpost walls are in here, other pine trees, other breakable trees, are all in here. Reload prefabs by clicking it. There. So So you can create fences that way too. When creating objects in a line, definitely keep them to static and copy it along one axis. And you can select multiples of them and do that. And if you hold down Control and select them all, group them together. Now you can move and rotate the entire thing. So I'm going to move it here, rotate it 90 degrees, minus 90. And create a pretty easy wall that way. Same thing with fences. If you create a group at an angle, let's see. So say I have, whoops. Okay, there we go. Say I have a group of objects in an angle that's not in a group. If I group them now, it's not going to select it all this way. It'll create a box like that, centered to the global XY coordinates. So it can get a little confusing trying to line them up. So I really recommend having everything in either the X or Y direction when you're grouping things together. It makes it easier to move stuff around. What's next? Another entity, one to play with. Game, play I. Should display them. Let's try a different one. So voids are, like I said before, just any wildlife. Unfortunately, there's not too many of them, limited to some birds and some sea animals. A couple bugs, maybe butterflies. The void itself is just a behavior. Then you select the model here. Size of them, count, and they'll generally just show up in game, so unfortunately I can't show them here. Randomness of the size, flocking, if they're going to flock together or not. Generally for fish you'll do that, other birds not so much. The radius is somewhere around here. There, radius, visibility distance, are they going to land on the ground a lot or often, or are they going to follow you around, are they going to avoid trees and other things, what's the maximum speed, all these parameters just go into how they behave. Okay, let's do an archway. Let's go in here. So if I'm going to create a tunnel through this mountain, this will be easier. Do I want it to be a natural cave, or do I want it to be an actual object? Object would just be one of these, not one of those. Couple of these you'll probably do, because there is a end cap and an entrance. So it's a couple objects together. Now there's an inner and outer, so like before when you had the vis area over the mech bay door, you'll do a similar thing here. Portal right around the outside of this, and then the vis area inside the tunnel. So as you enter the tunnel, it'll get dark and then brighten up as you leave or look out of the tunnel. If I group this together, and stick it in the ground. I'm not going to do the vis areas right now, but I will show you how to put it in here. You'll have to modify the terrain to get it to fit, because that end cap is all that should be sticking out, or you can find just a spot that works. Now, if you have objects overlapping, the engine doesn't know which one to render, so you kind of get this kind of shimmering effect. Same thing when you're inside, it can be kind of distracting. If you must, then change the height of one or something ever so slightly. It's going to create a little bump, but at least it'll render properly. You can probably do less than that. Otherwise, I just recommend having them not overlap if you can. See, it's still shimmering a little bit. Now to get into the tunnel, two things have to happen. Let's flatten the terrain, so we're going to select this button, follow terrain and snap to objects. So that'll tell me the height that's actually on the object itself. Let's look in here, 111. Okay, so we're going to set the actual height to 111. Add a radius a little bigger, and just kind of push the terrain around it a little bit. And then we're going to raise it over here. Smooth that out a little bit so it looks like there's some natural ridges. And then let's flatten this part so we have a smooth entrance. Just got to go back and forth, flatten, raise lower a little bit, just to get it to look right. There we go. Then we create a hole. So make hole and remove hole. Click once. Do not hold it down because you're going to start creating random holes in other parts of your map. And you will, if you create a hole, find them other places that you didn't think you were clicking. It's really weird like that. So just modify the brush size, and then these squares are what it removes. Very, very quickly click. A little bit sticking out there. And then we have to fill in the other ones. So remove hole. And you can't click on where there's nothing, so you have to click on next to it. You can hold down this. Safer to put it back than it is to remove. Now, because the terrain is stretched over it, this one square is in and out of the entire box. So I have to modify that terrain a little bit. I'm going to try and maybe I'll flatten it a little bit. That's weird. The smoother the terrain is around the tunnel, the easier it is going to be to do this. Holding control will lower the terrain. It's pretty good. Get rid of some of the sharp edges. Another thing to consider with terrain is watch this tries as I rotate around, and that's not just vegetation either. It's not rendering some at far distances. So if I go over here, if I do render only terrain, hide everything else. Each vertex in the terrain will render as a try, or something like that. Anyways, the point is, the more complex your terrain is, it will affect your performance. So smoothing it, and generally smoothing everything, not too much, but enough, will increase your performance. Where were we? There. Okay, don't know what that's doing. Okay, so now you have to tunnel through it. Another way to do it is through voxels. So we have to create a voxel object before we can paint on it. If I can remember where it is. Here, voxel object. So it's a square that you can create terrain that's not attached to the actual height map, or can be attached to the height map. So I'm going to place it right here, and I want it to box in everything that I'm going to modify. So I'm going to make this a lot bigger. Don't want to size it, stretch it. I have to change it uniformly, otherwise I can get some weird things happening with collisions. Same thing with other objects. Only thing you can ever really drag by one of these are like clouds, maybe some of the background clouds. There's some flat clouds that you can have too, instead of these 3D ones that you can stretch like that. Otherwise things will just fall right through the objects. So typing a number in here changes all of them. It's too big. That's good. So we're going to copy terrain into the voxel. And we're going to click Snap to Terrain. There. Now I will have to create a hole in order to go through it again. So I just copied this, but I'll just show you. Subtract, create actual material, blur it, or copy terrain. I'm going to do subtract a sphere. I'm going to set up a plane here, align the sphere to the plane, and if you look through the terrain, I've now created a hole through it. Very basic. Now I have to go back to the holes. And remove the terrain around where that was. Looks like the voxel didn't cut. Yeah, the voxel ends right here. So let's just look at this side. Even though I'm clicking where the terrain is, because I copied it into it, the voxel now takes the place of the terrain. Just make sure your voxel doesn't end when your terrain ends, otherwise you end up something like this. It has to connect. So there's a cave. Last thing I'm going to touch on is particle effects. And I guess materials too. So in the materials editor opened by M, we have all this stuff. If you can create your own, duplicate or copy and paste somewhere, and open any of these texture files to put onto them. Play around with the coloring, the mapping of it. The texture type, you're going to usually want it to be Illum for the shader, and then the surface type will affect what it looks like when things hit it, when someone steps on it, when someone shoots at it. Then there's other parameters here if you want to get really fancy. If things are reflective, if something else is going on with it. Generally, you can find almost anything within these textures somewhere. But if you need to create your own, feel free to. Just make sure to put the file you create within your map folder. Otherwise, you'll just be referencing a file that doesn't exist on someone else's computer. So particles, let's open up the database view. Particles, open the library. Where are we going? Living Legends. Oh. Explosions. So, just going to open up a different one. Yeah. So something exploding and then burning. Messing with the particles just takes a lot of practice. Looking at all these different parameters, the child particles, everything about it, really. And that's how I learned it. I'm not going to go over it right now, but I can tell you in person if you need help on it. This is what was used on Vox. So you can do stuff like that with particles. You can do, let's see, some, like on marshes, the green stuff moving around, those are particle effects for those bugs, the fireflies. Sandstorm, on Sandblasted, and a bunch of other maps, that's a particle effect. You can attach it to sounds, or sounds to the particles. Smoke coming out of reactors and stuff, or other particles. A lot to be done with it. Sounds, I'll just touch on briefly. If you have a, let's see, area sphere. Radius 300, then you just attach a sound to it. Unfortunately, to select it again, oops, you have to do select objects. If you do an area shape attached to a sound, it's not going to have a height limit. If you're over top of it, you'll hear it. So it's great for ambient sounds that you hear throughout the map, like wind, but something that's like, I don't know, just a small creek or some bugs or something, you don't want to hear that when you're way up in the air. Sound spot or ambient volume. Ambient volumes have their own sphere. You can also attach to it. Just load the file here through name, and there's a lot in here to go through. So if you're going to create a huge sound spot, or a forbidden area, you'll do it by linking a sound directly to the area, or linking the area to a sound. Like that. Same thing with the sound spot and forbidden area too. Forbidden area you're going to have to set as the opposite. And you're going to have to use the select objects to select it. Reversed equals true, I think. It's usually opposite in the editor from what it is in game for some reason. I don't recommend using the same shape for multiple objects. I might get confused. Like that. And you can set the delay and damage per second. And if you want to have a team specific, type 10 or black. I guess the last thing to talk about is getting into game. So make sure you have a start spot for both teams, several capture points, and then when it's all done, be sure to save it, obviously. Generate surface texture, do the time, let's see, calculate sky accessibility, to create a flow graph, so it'll be area trigger. Where is it? You just need to have an object that you attach it to. Oh, yeah, sorry, mini map. Okay, I'll get to that in a sec. Mini map. Flow graph. Create a flow graph here. I don't know. I'll put it in flow graph editor. You don't have to have the selected entity in it, just as long as it's attached to it here. So we're going to do add node. Really don't remember where it is. Time of day. Well, there's a start node somewhere. There it is. Start in game or in editor. Let's see. We're going to set the time to, we want to set it to. So see how everything just kind of went black? We just set it to midnight, I guess. 6. It's hours in decimal. So set time to 6 when the game starts, and you want to set the temperature part. So we're going to add a math integer somewhere. Unfortunately, there's no way to search through these. Just have to guess. Oh, there it is. So we're going to tell it to set a number. Let's say we want the temperature to be 20, and we want the conductivity to be 0.5 or 0.9. So a little less than standard. It's going to be hot, so it's not going to cool as effectively. The conductivity factor is really going to influence how the heat performs. The set temperature is just the baseline heat, so it can affect it a little bit. But if this is, I don't know, 2, you're never going to overheat, so don't put it to 2. So when the game starts, it's going to set the time to 6, and it's going to, you can also set the speed. Actually, I would suggest doing this, 0.03. And it's going to set the temperature like that. You can also have it do a loop based on the time of day, set different temperatures, and more complex things like that. Mini map. Okay, so we're going to use, I think, a 2048. You want it to be the same resolution as your map. Camera height has to be 4096 too. And you want to put it in the exact center. So you have to drag this can be a pain. It has to be close enough to the ground. To the center. This is the focal point for the camera. Fortunately, it kind of calculates it for you based on the old area. So that should be the exact center. And you do this new mini-map area. It's a little off. So by looking at X and Z, or you can move an object to 4096, 4096. So it should be there. Oh, it's over there. It's a bit closer. Good. Now it can get a little funny with the mini map. Definitely want to save it because it can be pain too. Set the time of day to usually noon. You want to turn the HDR off. It should do it for you. And if everything's set up correctly with the time of day, it won't wash everything out. If it does wash everything out, I would recommend setting it to midnight so it doesn't cast any shadows. It's going to be a lot darker, and then brightening it up in Photoshop or Paint.net or whatever you use. I should turn this off HDR for me. So I'm just going to hit Generate Minimap. Oh, I didn't set the time of day. It's okay. And stitches together a bunch of pictures over the entire map. It saves it into, let's see, your Crisis Wars game screenshots folder map. So it's going to be an XML. And this. Okay, so it's texture. I should have regenerated at higher quality. Should have done a higher quality mini map too. But so save it as a DDS. And name it minimap. Alright, whatever. I'll just show an example. Okay, sorry about that. So it will create the minimap into the screenshots folder under Crisis Wars, not under Living Legends mod. Open it in an image editor, save it as minimap.dds, and then you're going to move it to your game map folder. You're also going to go to generate export to engine, and that'll create the map pack files. So I'm going to show you a finished example of this. Where is it? Mods, Living Legends. Here's one that I've been working on updating. So you're going to have your mini map. Create the out of bounds area. You got to draw it in yourself. So usually with the out of bounds is I like to reference off of points that I've created myself, or people are just going to end up killing themselves. I do recommend creating additional layer and embossing it. It helps objects pop out a bit more, and then just using that as an overlay. Loading file can be anything, it's just got to be a DTS. And then, well, get out of here. Okay, this. So this string is what you want to copy into your level XML, which you will, I think, have to create here. So minimap, there. Game rules, terrain control, test of strength, and Team Solaris Arena, unless you're making an SA map, which I'm not going to cover now. Loading screens, loading.tds, your header, background about it, and then the display name, that's what's going to display in the server. So here I have a materials folder with a bunch of materials that I use in this map. I'm not going to send the cry file out with it or anything, but everything else, terrain texture pack, level pack, XML, loading, and minimap should be in it. And then when you zip it up, you're going to create a new folder. Actually not levels, multiplayer. TC or TSA or SA, wherever it's going to unpack to, and then move. Then move your everything in here. Move everything in here. Delete your cry file unless you want to give that out to everyone. And if you do want to give that out to everyone, I don't recommend doing it here because it's going to increase download time. And then zip it. And then you have your packed map file. Is there anything else I'm forgetting? I don't think there is. Oh, yeah, I did. I forgot to, yeah. That's important. Great. Oh, okay. I don't think I'm forgetting anything else. Here's an example of how I've structured all my layers. Another trick you can use is sketch mode, help you see everything, and that'll work in any view spec. I think that's about it. So, any questions?
Planet Baker 3. Ambient temperature negative 34.54 degrees. Local time is 11:43:43 GST.
Okay, if you don't have any other questions, then I'm going to end the stream now. So, didn't make a complete map, but hopefully you get the idea.